Bluegrass Jamalong is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas. This episode is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, the home of roots music instruction. If you want to improve your playing, join me and thousands of other pickers getting better every day at pegheadnation.com. Hi, this is Matt, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jamalong, the podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Bluegrass Jamalong. This episode is going to be with Alister Atkin, who is the guy who founded Atkin Guitars over here in the UK. And I've been following their progress for a few years now, and they're really cool. I've played some of their instruments, and they are extraordinary. Essentially, they're American-style pre-war acoustic guitars you will be very familiar with. But A, they are brilliant, and B, there's some really interesting stuff goes into them. I think Atkin were probably at the forefront of the idea of aging acoustic guitars, which has been around in the electric world for a while, but there's an interesting process there, and we chat about that. We also chat about how Alister got into making guitars in the first place. Some really cool stuff around how you get a vintage sound and feel, but using some modern techniques. So we're going to talk about baking some wood, we're going to talk about freezing some, we're going to talk about 3D printing to make moulds. It's fascinating stuff. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think Alister is not only making extraordinary guitars with his team, but it's also just really interesting to talk about this stuff. And so I really hope you enjoy it. One tiny point to mention is that when Alister chats to me about me playing guitar, I say that I play the theme tune on the podcast, which until last week I did, but I have a brand new theme tune, which you've just heard, which is played and written and arranged by Brian Sutton. So if the guitar playing sounds slightly better than you thought it might, that's why. It is not me anymore, it's Brian. Thanks to Brian for that. Brian plays the guitar, the mandolin, the banjo and the bass on it. And he got Justin Moses in to play fiddle. It's quite extraordinary. Thank you to both of those for that theme tune. It's marvellous. And thank you to Alister for this interview. I really, really enjoyed it. Please do check it out. And I'll stick a link in the show notes if you want to go and look at their stuff online or find a dealer wherever you happen to be. But that is it. Here comes my chat with Alister Atkin. My guest on Bluegrass Jamalong this week is Alister Atkin, and Alister Atkin is Alister Atkin of Atkin Guitars, which a lot of you will know about. I became a little bit obsessed with Atkin Guitars about 3 or 4 years ago when I was getting back into music and getting this podcast going, and I spotted some of their guitars online, and I've been following their progress ever since, so I'm really excited to chat about this. So Alister, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Matt. I'm really pleased to be here, and you're doing a great job, so yeah, fire away. I'm yours for as long as you need me.
Wow, there's an offer. Brilliant. I think maybe a cool place to start just before we dig into some stuff is, like, for people who don't know Atkin, how would you describe kind of the brand and what you guys do?
Okay, yeah. Well, essentially, we're a small workshop, and when I say small, that's by probably more like American standards, because there's 15 of us in our workshop. Over here in the UK, we're probably the biggest in England. But there's plenty of our size businesses over in the US and across Europe. So we employ lots of technology, which has been developed over the last 30 years. But really, we're about making one-off instruments that we can repeat, making those instruments in a way that makes them as desirable as possible. We're all about getting the feel and the sound of the instrument and the aura of a great instrument. And since starting, I would say the things that were perhaps once very important in the acoustic guitar world, which was about making everything perfect and getting a spotless finish and looking like it was, hatched out of an egg in a way that just looked this, or made by a higher being. I've come to the conclusion that we're not about that anymore, and we're very much about trying to give the customer something that feels real and it feels emotional and you can connect with it. And often, and when I talk about perfection, often the perfection that I'm looking for may not be a perfect finish, or those things that have always been held in such high regard on those instruments. It's really about trying to get to the essence of what makes a guitar really work well for a player and for them to feel comfortable and excited playing it. So that's kind of my mission, and I've become very comfortable with that mission, which I think probably 15, 20 years ago, that wouldn't have been a comfortable place to be. But I think that's largely why our guitars are gaining success, is because I think people can see past a lot of the stuff that's been sold to them in prior years, and now they're beginning to see that there's an essence of an instrument that is really important. That the great music that we all know and love was not played on perfect instruments, and they all had their foibles, and they had bags of character. And without wanting to sound, I'm not pointing any fingers at anyone, but I think that's been lost over the years in striving for certain types of perfection, and I think they're not necessarily the most important things in an instrument. I hope that makes sense.
Totally does. And it's a weird balance, isn't it? If you're in the modern age building an instrument that somebody could be buying in London, or could be buying in kind of, Nashville, or could be buying in Ontario or wherever, like there's an element with which you want to be able to present it with an instrument. They're going to know what they're going to get. They're going to get like a replicated thing, but at the same time, each bit of wood is slightly different, and like you can't have like a measurement of, well, all the tops will be exactly this way, because each bit of wood has got a different character, and you kind of got to work with it, haven't you?
You do, and I think something that's really true is if you are able to give 20 great guitar makers the same set of wood, they would all come up with something different. And even if they were building, say you were all told to build a herringbone dreadnought, a D28 style instrument, everyone would come up with a slightly different sound. And I think that's where we have really honed our skills, because I would say now, another thing, if people have heard me speak before, probably might have heard me say this before, but if we were throwing a dart into a dartboard, I think we're getting sort of into the 50 or the 25 pretty regularly. And I never pick up one of our instruments and go, oh, this one's not really as good as I'd like it to be. They all have their merits, and they will all find a player who will make that guitar work. So I'm really proud of that. I think that's something which, once you get to a certain size or a certain type of business, you don't have that anymore. And we're able to reproduce our sound over and over again.
We'll be right back with you just after this. Collings Guitars has been a long-time supporter of the bluegrass community, from collaborating with artists to sponsoring festivals big and small, and now by sponsoring Bluegrass Jam Along. Handmade in Austin, Texas, every Collings guitar and mandolin that leaves the shop is built from the sound up, and the team loves seeing a Collings in the hands of players of all levels, from local musicians to world-renowned pickers. Visit collingsguitars.com for more. This episode is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, the home of roots music instruction. With 65 streaming video courses for guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, dobro, bass and ukulele from some of the leading names in acoustic music, Peghead Nation has something for every picker. You'll learn the tunes and techniques you need to join in at jams and play the music you love, plus advanced techniques like improvisation, theory and ear training. Your first course is just $20 per month, and you can add more for $10 a month. Sign up for any course and get your first month free with the promo code JAMALONG, all one word. Join thousands of other players, including me, who are advancing on their instruments and having more fun playing the roots music they love at pegheadnation.com. And that's really cool. I mean, I have heard you speak before, and I listened to the podcast that you put out a couple of years ago, and there's a lovely episode with Boo Hewerdine, who's, for those who don't know, is a wonderful, wonderful kind of British songwriter. And he said something along the lines of your guitars have songs in them, lots of songs in them. And I've heard you talk about how, like, sort of being inspired by songwriters is a big part of your guitar journey, and it's not just a artifact; it's a thing, and it's a part of the creative process, and that sort of sits at the heart of what you do.
Yeah, I mean, when I started, that was really all I was interested in. I had I've been listening to in depth to Joni Mitchell and Stephen Stills and Neil Young and those great 60s singer-songwriters, Bob Dylan. And for me, it really was about the song. I didn't really want to hear people playing instrumentally, to be honest. And I wasn't really that bothered about the technique as such. It was much more about how, in the hands of the right people, they can make that instrument do something amazing to accompany themselves. And even when you sort of, obviously you can listen to Joni Mitchell and it's incredible what she does. I'm not taking anything away from her, but then, you can also listen to someone like John Prine. And essentially he's only playing 3 chords most of the time. And yet how he pulls so many amazing songs out of those combinations. And the guitar parts just sound intricate but simple at the same time. I don't really understand it, but that was the thing that captured me. It was just, it's unlocking this instrument and making the way that these songwriters can just bring this stuff out of themselves and that tool that they've got. And that's what really inspired me.
It's funny, I feel very much the same way about Steve Earle. And like when you hear Steve Earle play, nobody else, whether he's strumming or finger picking, nobody else sounds quite like Steve Earle does. But it's a glorious thing.
It is, and in some ways you can listen to those players and if they were sitting, and I've been there, sitting in that environment and they're trying a guitar out, most people would walk past them and think, this is not much good. I don't know if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But when they're trying stuff, and it's when the whole thing comes together and something special happens, and these people elevate themselves into a higher plane, and that really blows my mind.
Well, it's funny you talk about Neil Young and those, like an album like Harvest, and you listen to Heart of Gold, and that is like, there's not a better guitar sound on record, but it wouldn't matter if it wasn't. It's just a great song with a great vocal recorded. Yeah, like it just sounds good. You can hear all of it.
I know, and that's kind of that style of recording which happened for a while, and they captured so much brilliant, whether it's the room or the compression or whatever it is, it's just so good. And you still hear great acoustic guitar sounds, and some people, but it's quite different in some respects. One person I thought really actually got a brilliant acoustic guitar sound was Kelly Joe Phelps in his sort of some of his earlier slide albums. And there was, did you listen to that Sky Like a Broken Clock? Did you ever listen to Kelly Joe Phelps?
No, I don't think I know that.
No, well, again, he seemed to capture that feeling really well. And anyway, so I could bang on about this stuff all night.
Yeah, and it's cool. I think that thing at thinking of a guitar as like part of the creative process is a beautiful way to look at it. And so I was just curious to know, because I love hearing how people kind of get into this stuff in the first place. I believe a lot of people wander into this stuff, and I've talked to Nully at Collings, and he kind of did various other things first, and I know he's a good friend of yours. But you sort of were on that path a little bit earlier than some, weren't you?
Yeah, I was really fortunate. When I was at school, we had a CDT department. So I think it's called DT now, Design Technology. And they encouraged you to sort of make something that you wanted to make. And I made an electric guitar. And I met a chap called Andy Crockett while I was making that. I was buying the bits off him, and I spent time with him asking him how to do this stuff, at that point I was just absolutely hooked. I couldn't quite believe what I'd found. I was just like, oh my God, this world is amazing. But at the time, whenever you spoke to any of those guys, and Andy was the same, don't get involved in this. You'll never make any money at it. It we're just scratching around in the dirt, and none of that bothered me. I was so hooked instantly that I just thought, I've got to keep doing this. So I finished. I did an A level in CDT, and then I found a course up in London, which isn't going anymore, I don't think. The college is shut, but the London School of Furniture, and they had a guitar making course there, and I went and studied there for a couple of years, and that was, although the course was very basic and it was really underfunded, but there were some passionate tutors on that course, and we all, if you wanted to, you could learn stuff, and I just threw myself into it.
It's funny, isn't it? It's that, we were talking just before we started this interview about how much information is available now that wasn't. And like, on one hand, there wasn't the internet, but on the other hand, also, if you're studying and like fascinated by American classic guitars, the number of them you had access to over here, let alone the people who built them, was probably pretty limited.
Yeah. Certainly at that point. Being in London, obviously you could go to Denmark Street and you could see the vintage stuff. But again, I wasn't really aware of vintage guitars back then. And I wouldn't have been looking at them in a way that I would look at them now. I think I'd have been looking at... I remember going to try and buy a Martin in Denmark Street around that time. And I would have been looking at the newer Martins, so the early 90s guitars. You didn't really... It wasn't something you saw a lot of, unless you were really looking, and I wouldn't have been looking at the vintage stuff. It would have been beyond me to think of that at that point. But a seminal moment, I could say there were two things that really blew my mind. I don't know if any of your listeners would be familiar with two guitar makers in Germany in a town called Tübingen. It's and there's Henkes and Blatzer were these two brilliant acoustic guitar makers who made the most spectacular American style instruments, and I'm sure some of your listeners have them, but they didn't make a lot of them, and I think they might still be making. I'm not sure. I haven't spoken to them for quite a while, but I went to their workshop, and it was just like walking into... Is it Giuseppe or Giuseppo? Who's Pinocchio's creator?
Yeah, Geppetto.
Yeah, Geppetto. Yeah, it's like walking into that workshop, and everything looked like that, but they were making world-class instruments. And it was at that point I thought, well, and if they can make them here, anyone can make them anywhere. You've just got to know what you're doing. And so that changed my life, meeting those guys. And they were really open to telling you how to do stuff. And I was talking to them about the thickness of tops and going, well, my guitars don't sound like this. What's going on? And they told me loads of really useful information. I spent an afternoon with them, but I sucked as much out of it as I could, and it was brilliant. And the next thing that happened was I walked into the Acoustic Centre. Did you ever go into the Acoustic Centre in Wapping? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was a guy called Seamus Brady who worked there. And Seamus had just taken on this new line of guitars, and I saw one on the wall, and I was like, what's this? He goes, that's a Collings. And I picked it up, and I just looked at it and played it for, I don't know, an hour or something, and was just like, jaw drop. And I thought, well, this is another level of something I've never seen, anything quite like it. And, of course, then I discovered the Santa Cruz and all those other great makes. And not forgetting all the great Gibsons out there, a lot of the older stuff, and then started to find the older Martins. And once you get into that, and coupled with the fact that you love the music that's made on them, it becomes a real kind of geeky, weird world of taking things apart, looking inside, measuring everything with calipers, and trying to understand what's doing what. And gradually, the more you make and the more stuff you try, you start to hone in on those things that make great guitars.
Was it sort of the Dreadnought models you started with?
Yeah, I can pinpoint the moment I saw the front cover of the Crosby, Stills and Nash album, and just saw Stephen Stills with that Dreadnought. Thought that's the instrument I need to make, and I just kept on making those. I think for the first sort of 10 guitars, and just I think that's a really good discipline if you can focus on one thing and just go after it until you feel that you're getting somewhere. It sort of, and don't stray from the path too much. For me, that really helped kind of learn some of those things. But what tends to happen when you're a jobbing guitar maker, at some point someone comes along and orders something, and they might not be ordering the thing that you know how to make, and the inside information from any guitar maker is say yes, and then work out how to do it. So, early on I was making classical guitars and different acoustic guitars and weird stuff that I would never have chosen to make, but it was a paycheck, and it's hard to make money when you first start making guitars. Nobody wants your guitars.
It's funny. I remember I interviewed Brian Sutton on the podcast, and he said in his early days of doing session work, he got a call from a producer one night who'd said, "Oh, you're coming in to do guitar tomorrow. Do you play mandolin as well?" And he just went, "Yeah." And he owned a mandolin, but he didn't play it, and so he'd spend the night learning some chords and went in and sort of fudged his way through it. And
off he goes. Yeah, and I know, and that's probably the beauty of youth, isn't it? You kind of you're going to have a pop at these things, and some of it works. But I think, if anyone's getting into this, you just have to throw yourself into it, and you're going to make a load of mistakes, and those are the important things we all know that get you where you need to go.
Yeah, and so at what point did you, like, you're making Dreadnoughts and looking at other guitars and measuring and kind of learning the stuff that is out there already? At what point did you start kind of thinking, well, there's something I want to do with this that's not quite what everybody else is doing? Well, at what point did a bit of you start to enter that process?
Well, it's a slow thing, that, and you kind of it probably took a good 10 years to get to the point where you'll come up with a thing that you think, oh, I think that actually is good, and you'll stick with that thing, and then and it might be like you get your headstock design, and you think, yeah, that's good, and you've been through 3 others that weren't quite good enough, and eventually you hit this thing, and then you might sort of go, oh, that neck joint, I wonder what I can do about that, and then you gather all this information. But if you're actually talking about where we are now, which is making this sort of wartime style guitars with aged finishes, which is what I think we've become really well known for, and arguably the first people to do it on acoustic guitars to any effect. It was an accident, really. We were making sort of high gloss, perfect American style guitars, and at some point one got dropped, and I was like, oh bugger, what am I going to do? and I'd always wondered about relicking an acoustic guitar, and when you don't make that many of something and money's a bit tight, you don't tend to, you're a bit scared of doing, you've spent say 2 weeks making a guitar, and now you're going to sort of scratch it all up. That seems so counterintuitive to what needs to happen. But this thing came up, and I was like, right, I'm just going to relic it the best way I can. and it was one of our J43 models. And at the time, we'd just started making guitars for the Buddy Holly Foundation, which was about 15 years ago. And I did this job on it, and I thought, okay, we took some pictures of it, put it on the website, and it sold that night. Ooh, that's interesting. That never happens. And so then I think the next thing I thought, well, the Tony Rice guitar, the Clarence White Tony Rice guitar, I'm going to make one of those and try and make one look like Tony Rice's. So made that, came up with that name, the White Rice, which was kind of just perfect, and that sold instantly as well. And so I spent the next few years just sort of a bit like a sort of scientist in a laboratory, working out how to do a really good aged finish on an acoustic guitar. And it took so long to work it out, and took so much criticism from the general public when you'd post stuff online. But you're starting to get reactions, and most of the time you don't get any reaction. Yeah. So a reaction is a really good thing. And so I'm thinking, there's people in America who hate this, but there's also people in America who love this. And you think, this has never happened before. So half of them seem to like it, half hate it. Well, that's fine, you know. And so I kept on going, and and it just started to spiral then, and it's gone like that ever since. We do far less of the scratching stuff up and bashing it around now. I mean, we still get asked for it and we do it, but probably 90% of what we do is what we call our standard aged finish, which is really thin nitrocellulose and discoloured tops to make them look like a pre-war instrument, and sort of rounding edges off to make them comfortable, and all these things, but a really thin nitro finish, which ultimately is what those original guitars were. So I mean, I don't think we've reinvented anything, but we've concentrated on what they were and had the balls to actually do it, you know. And I think that is something which probably a lot of people felt frightened of because of the trend in having perfect finishes, and so and the thing that I can stand up and put my hand on my heart, I hate selling things I'm not interested in or that I don't think are good. I can't sell them, but as soon as I believe in something, I can sell it, and I honestly think that what we're making is as good as anything else out in the world. Some of what we're doing, I think, is unique in its own way. And that's why it's become, I think, that all those little things that I spent a lot of time working on paid off in that respect.
Yeah, it's really interesting because this, like, looking at an acoustic guitar and you look at electric guitars and people, distressed, relict, aged, whatever you want to call it. But having seen some of your acoustics closer, but particularly the electrics, people go kind of full on, let's like beat the shit out of this. But with acoustics, it's usually much subtler, and it definitely, the word aged sound or relic to like it, and it's all that the tiny cracks and the crazing in the finish that make something look that old. And it's a much more subtle thing than a lot of people would expect, like hearing it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I read somewhere that the way you get that is to freeze the guitar once it's made.
Yeah, correct. So, and it's again, I've said this before. This is what's so cool about it is, so when we build a guitar, we make the body and the neck, and we fit them together, but we finish them apart. So we'll spray them and polish them up, and then they're ready to go together. But at the point that they're polished, we'll freeze them, and we'll take them in and out of the freezer, and that will get this checking going on, and it just sort of relaxes the lacquer in a really nice way. And if you're into those instruments, and the other great thing it does, it puts that guitar through its paces in and out of different humidities and temperatures, and that to me made so much sense when you look at those original guitars and you imagine where they've been, and if they've been around for 70, 80 years and they've been gigged and they've been in America, you know damn well they've been in every possible climate, sat in the back of cars, in freezing conditions, in baking hot summers. If you were just in New York, you'd get both of those things. And the great guitars have survived. So we're replicating that in a way, and I feel like it does have an impact on the sound, because the other thing we do is we bake all the tops so that they've been, the aging process has kind of sped up. All the moisture's gone and the resins have started to crystallize, and it's kind of become something different to a brand new guitar. And the other great thing is that because wood moves and it's got its own sort of memory and it's going to move around, if you can make all that happen before you put the neck and the body together, your final setup and your final neck angle and the geometry of the guitar, you can make it perfect after all those things have happened. And so it's a bit like taking a neck off an old Martin that needs a neck reset and making it good again, But we've made this thing, do all its stuff, or a lot of its stuff, and then we've put it together and it's sort of in its best state. Again, this is all in my weird imagination of what I think is going on, and I'm certainly not going to argue with any scientist over it. But the proof is in the sound of them and the difference in sound between the stuff that I've come across. I wholeheartedly believe it makes a difference.
Yeah, and so that process of baking the wood, it's like you say, this idea of basically replicating a journey that a guitar's been on over many years, but getting to the point where you have a guitar that sounds like that now rather than when you're going to buy, and in 25 years it might. Does that? Yeah.
I never liked that sales pitch personally. This guitar's going to sound great in 10 years. I want it to sound great now, But
also, what if it doesn't? Like, what's your returns policy? How long have I got?
Yeah, exactly.
I'll bring it back.
Yeah, it's a great sales
relics, and I'll charge you for it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I believe also the necks are then bolted on, aren't they? So they can be removed pretty quickly if needed at some point.
Yeah. Our neck joint is very similar to the Collings, and other people do it as well. But it made so much sense to me when I saw that neck joint. And there were a group of us in this country who were going, should we try the bolt-on neck joint? And we'd be phoning each other, have you done it yet? Oh, no, I'm a bit scared. and then a group of us started doing it, going, my God, this is brilliant. This is so good. And it makes so much sense because the neck's being pulled so tightly onto the body, which you can get with a dovetail joint. You can get a dovetail joint to pretty much sit in, and you wouldn't need to glue it if your joint's good enough in some respects. But it just made production really, really effective. And also the added bonus of, if you want to do a neck reset, we've done neck resets in an hour before now, and people have been, if they're in a rush and they need to get out on the road again and they've come down to the workshop, it's not ideal, but you know that it's going to stand up. And you couldn't do that with a Gibson or a Martin. Anyone who's repaired an old Gibson or any Gibson will be tearing their hair out, thinking that the sides are going to break when you take the neck out, or whatever. Something horrible might happen. So it's very it makes a lot of sense.
It's funny. It sort of puts me in mind of like the way, particularly in this country, we treat houses, and like everybody wants a characterful Victorian house, but not the one that's drafty or one that's damp. Or
no.
It's like building a guitar that's the equivalent of a new build with the character and the soul of like an old, an old house type thing, isn't it? But lived in.
It is, and I really get when people say, well, that sounds a bit sort of like buying the ripped pair of jeans, and sort of you haven't worked for that. yeah, and I do get that argument completely, but I do also believe that with our instruments, there's the benefits outweigh that sort of weird side. And we don't have to smash the guitars up. A lot of people don't even realise they're aged when they see them on the wall of a guitar shop. It's only when you pick them up and feel those contours. And there is something really nice about playing a guitar neck that has been played in. We all love that. So why not give it to somebody straight away?
Well, there's also that thing of, with the market being what it is, most of us can't afford to buy a guitar that's been played in for 60 years that is any good.
Exactly. That's exactly where I was coming from. We were really lucky. We used to, Andy Crockett, who I work with, used to do a lot of the repairs for a guy called Tony Winecki, who's in Sevenoaks over here. Replay Acoustics. Have you come across them, Matt? Yeah, and he has, in this country, some of the best American acoustic guitars you're ever going to find. And he's sort of, 40 minutes up the road. So he'd bring all this stuff down to Andy, and you might need to put a new back on something or retop something, reset the neck. And I'd spend so much time inside those guitars, just looking at everything that was going on. And then hearing those guitars, and some of them were insanely good. There was one I remember picking up. It was, I think, a 52 D28, and it literally sounded like 4 and 20 by Stephen Stills when you played on it. It sounded like the record, and I don't recall anything sounding like that before I'd heard that, and it blew my mind, really.
It's really interesting, that kind of confluence of that with the modern stuff like a bolt-on neck. And I remember hearing you talk about having a couple of year period where all the Collings instruments that came into the UK came through your workshop because the guy was the importer, didn't have space from that home for a while. And
Doug Chandler. Do you remember Chandler Guitars up in London? Yeah, it was Doug. It was lovely. What a great experience. And Bill Collings came to the workshop once as well, and for me that was like John Lennon coming over, and I sort of locked him in the workshop for a night and sort of give me the information, and he was really speaking in riddles, but he was. I listened to it, obviously everything he said, because I held it in such high regard, and it was really useful,
It's funny with stuff like that, isn't it? Is the idea of speaking in riddles is people can tell you like what they do or how they do it, but sometimes the deeper level of the why and what the meaning behind it all is like a bit more nebulous.
Well, yeah, and it's not until you actually do it that you really understand what people are talking about. And I remember those conversations and just coming away just thinking, what on earth did he mean? And but I kind of went on with some of the things he suggested, and then the lessons came later. And one big thing he was all about was when I was looking at all these modern finishes. This is before doing any aging or anything. You'd go to a guitar show and you'd go around everyone's booths and you'd be looking at all these perfect finishes of all the usual suspect guitars, big names. And I walked around with Bill looking at these guitars. I said, well, look at that finish. He goes, yep, stick with what you're using. Cellulose is the best, and he didn't even use it himself because they were producing higher volume guitars. They used it on their higher end stuff, and they had a top coat cellulose at that point, but they'd had to move away from it because they couldn't make it work on the numbers that they were doing, I think. But now that they use it on their high level stuff, and the other thing that he was very sort of into was varnish finishes, which if you talk to any mandolin maker or that's what that's all about. And so yeah, I mean, I've collect quite a lot of instruments myself, and I've got mandolins. I went a bit bonkers on mandolins a little while ago, and I commissioned a mandolin from Do you know Andy Manson?
Oh yeah,
Yeah. So he made me an F-style mandolin, and then he made me an F-style mandola, and then a friend of mine had a Dudenbostel mandolin, and he swapped that with me for our 2000th instrument. So I've had the experience of that as well, and various I've got old Gibsons and various other things, and when you look at those instruments and the way they're put together, they're just so understated a lot of the time, and the finishes are so beautiful, and on those sorts of instruments and archtop instruments, you really notice the difference. And when it's translated onto acoustic guitars, it's a really cool thing. But it's a difficult thing to mass produce, obviously.
Well, that's a really interesting thing, because as you were saying that, you were talking about Collings, and just that idea that you are building the thing that, and like you're saying, you can't sell something you're not passionate about. So you've got to build instruments that you care about, you believe in, you're passionate about. You've also got to do that at a price point that makes you some money so you can keep doing it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And because I'd spent so much time doing mirror finish cellulose guitars, when most of my peers were using like an acid catalyst, which is a much quicker thing to put on, and it polishes up really easily, and there's and I'm not belittling it at all. I mean, it works really great on certain instruments, but on our sorts of instruments, it's really the wrong thing to use, to my mind. And but I'd already got my head around the fact that finishing took a long time, so I built that into my pricing. Whereas if you started and thought, oh, we've got to do this, we can never make any money out of that. I'd already come to terms with the fact that that's how you finished a guitar. And so, yeah, it was built into the pricing already, really.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, and being as this is a bluegrass podcast, I can't really not ask you about this, the white rice model that you guys make. Which is like, how would you describe it? Is it a kind of a copy? Is it inspired by? Is it a tribute to that guitar? Like, what level of kind of detail?
I think the detail has sort of changed over the years, and it started off very much as trying to copy it and being inspired by it. I remember seeing that guitar 25, 30 years ago in Acoustic Guitar magazine, and just thought, oh, look at that. That looks amazing. And you just drool over a picture and open the picture up again the next day. It give you, shivers. And so and of course, noticing that other guitar makers had tried to make that guitar, and it was a guitar that you fancied having a pop at, and I think to start with, it was like, oh, we can do this, and we can get the look of it pretty close, and sound wise, I don't know that I'm ever going to hear that guitar with my own ears, but it was started to sort of focus in on the way it was put together. There's a lot of articles out there you can read about it, and I think there's still more to go with that instrument, to be honest. I think we could revisit what we're doing and probably build a special model that was even more like the original. Now, have you seen that video I did with John Jorgensen? Did you ever come across that?
Yes.
Yeah. So in that, I took this 2 or 3 white rices to a place in Sevenoaks near here, where John and his band were staying. There's Herb Peterson. Have you had any dealings with Herb?
No.
Do you know that name?
Yeah, I know the name, but I don't know Herb.
Yeah, he's amazing. And so I'd spoken to John on email, and they happened to be in the UK. So I said, can I come and show you these white rice guitars? Because I'd like to get your input. And they'd all played it. They played the original, and they were throwing loads of information at me. And I go, oh yeah, no, I think the neck is from like an OM or something like that. And the way it felt was this, and this, and And I think that guitar's meant to have a Gretsch fingerboard on it as well. And the Clarence White bought it in a bag of sort of bits and had a guitar maker put it back together for him. And so to actually know exactly what it is, I think if I spent a bit more time researching it, which I've been meaning to, I think we could get closer to it. But we've sold it to quite a lot of bluegrass players, and it certainly ticks the box for them. I think it's one of those instruments. The big sound hole just totally changes the sound of a dreadnought. Have you played many? Have you played one of our White Rices?
No, so I've played the Essential Ds and the D37s and the J43s, but I've never seen a White Rice kind of in a shop in person.
It'd be good for you to find out what you thought, because changing the sound hole really changes. The bigger sound hole changes the sound of the instrument quite considerably. And to the point where you sometimes wonder, well, why don't they all have big sound holes? Because we've put the big sound hole on OMs, and again, it projects really well. It feels really solid, and it's a strange thing, really. And so I think, I'm proud of the ones we make. I think that we've gotten it. I'm going to imagine we're at sort of 75% of what's possible to replicate, and I think that probably a little bit more time on that if people are interested, and maybe they could email you and say get Alister to make one then, and it might drive us. But I think that could do with a revisit and just taking it on to another level again.
It's funny what you were saying before about like these pre-war guitars having been through shifts in climate and various other, like, that guitar has been flooded, it's been shot, it's been like it's hard to think, apart from maybe Willie Nelson's guitar, and it's hard to think of many guitars that have lived more than that one. Yeah,
exactly. And it also just shows you how resilient they are, doesn't it? If we often get people say, I've scratched my guitar, what shall I do? And my go-to is I'll send them a picture of Trigger and check that out. Willie's been playing that for 60 years and he's still playing it, so you've got nothing to worry about. That guitar's really been through the mill, hasn't it? Is it true that Billy Strings has it now? Do you know?
No, it was taken up to a gig he was doing by Tony's widow, and Billy played it and then played it at a gig, but he doesn't have it.
Right.
I believe, and I don't know, but I believe it is still with the family.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's I'd heard someone said, "Oh, Billy Strings has bought it," but amazing.
I think he bought one of Tony's own Santa Cruz models.
Right.
I might be wrong about that, but that's what I remember reading. But I've spoken to people who played that guitar, and more than one of them has said I couldn't get a sound out of it.
Really?
Like, it's, just the way the action was. And but I know I spoke to Tony Trishka about playing Earl Scruggs' banjo, and he was like, I couldn't get a decent sound out of it. And
I love that. That's so cool, isn't it?
And you listen to Tony Rice play it, and it's all, you alluded to this before, but the sound is in the human being playing it. And to the extent where I interviewed Wyatt about Tony, and he was talking about the ovations, and there's people argue about which tracks Tony plays an ovation on some records, and if you can't tell the difference between a D28 and an ovation, that is like, it tells you something.
It does.
Not
totally.
That the guitar's not important, obviously, but it's the guitar, and it's like you were saying at the beginning. Essentially, it's the guitar will find the person who wants that guitar.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this so many times. There was a guy who used to come over here called Ben Andrews. Do you know that name?
No.
He was a blues singer, and he just pitched up in Canterbury, and he had some manager who ran a sort of blues label over here. And I went to see him play in the local pub, and he was incredible. Like, it was like seeing Ry Cooder live, and he was playing the cheapest acoustic guitar you could find, and it sounded incredible. And I know damn well if I'd picked that guitar up and tried to do anything with it, I'd have sounded, it would have sounded mediocre as hell. There's a good article I read a long time ago, but it puts this exactly what we're saying. There was some drummer with some session drummer that cited this older session drummer as his favourite, and he was saying the ride cymbal that this guy's got, he's got a pasty such and such, and when I hear that cymbal, it's the best sounding cymbal I've ever heard, and he got to the point eventually where he was playing a gig with this guy, and he said, "Can I have a go on your drum kit?" And he said he sat on the stool, and there he was, and the cymbal was right there, and he started playing, went to the cymbal. He thought, "Oh, well, that doesn't sound very good." You know, and it's exactly that, isn't it? It's great, really.
And I think, and I've talked to people about this before, but there's something I've heard attributed to Norman Blake that he sort of says that you play yourself into an instrument a bit. And I've got like a cheap Simon & Patrick cedar top dreadnought downstairs that my wife bought me when we got married 25 years ago. 25 odd years ago. It's brilliant. It's way better than it has any right to be. And I'm pretty convinced that part of that is it's brilliant for me because I've played it for that long. And so whatever frequencies I produce with the sound that I make, it's vibrate. I don't need. Do you know what I mean?
But I will say this about Simon & Patrick guitars. If anybody asks me what guitar to buy under £1,000, that's the guitar I tell them to buy. Because I've experienced the Simon & Patricks sounding excellent. And they're really basic, but they still have a brilliant sound. And they're a handmade, well-made guitar. But I definitely think that a guitar, when you pick it up, should bring something out of you that you've never done before, and sort of you can find yourself thinking, "Oh, I've never. What's this coming out?" You know, and that's great when that happens, I think.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny because there's stuff that you get hung up on, and I have opinions about this, and everybody does, like neck shape, for example. But there've been guitars that I've played that have had neck shapes I would not choose. But I prefer that guitar to another guitar that's got a neck shape I do choose. And you go, well, I can work with that if the neck's a bit clubbier than I wanted it to be. Or like I've got an Eastman, a fairly cheap Eastman, which sounds amazing. And I would never choose a guitar with that neck. I bought it in lockdown from eBay when I couldn't go and play guitar anywhere else. And, you know, I just got used to it, you know.
Absolutely. And I think, if you can find enough going on, you just get around it, don't you? So do you play a lot? I'm not familiar with your playing, but are you playing on the podcast when I hear?
Yes, that's me.
Wow, you're really good.
Oh, thank you. It's all the kind of backing tracks, but also the theme tune and all the bits and pieces. That's.
Oh, wow. Oh, fair play. Yeah, I need to put some practice in.
I think another thing I'd like to talk to you about a little bit, if it's all right, while I've got you, is the electric side of things.
Yeah,
because when I sort of started kind of following your progress via social media and various other bits, it was pretty much all acoustics, and the electrics are a relatively new thing. And maybe this is an oversimplification, but it feels like your acoustic guitars are largely Gibson and Martin inspired, and the electrics are largely Fender inspired.
Go on. Is that
but I think what I like about them, there's so much I like about them, but they're fun. Like they look so many. I'm not going to mention names, but like high-end, expensive electric guitar builders, like you were saying before, build these beautiful, clean, gorgeous, jaw-dropping, stunning things that look very grown up.
Yeah.
And your guitars are all of those things, but they also look playful, and I really like that about them.
Oh, good. No, I mean, there's no that's not a surprise because it was born out of lockdown, really, and we'd started we came back after, the first 3 months or however it was now, and sort of came back in dribs and drabs, and there were we were on a 2-day week and then a 3-day week, and we found ourselves sort of thinking, well, what else can we do? Has anyone got any projects they want to have a pop at? And the electric had been sort of talked about a little bit, and I'd been doing some drawings on guitar shows. I remember just sort of trying to come up with an electric shape, and I've been speaking to various players because obviously we deal with a lot of pro players, and although a lot of them are great acoustic guitar players, they're also brilliant electric guitar players. So it was something that I was interested in, and there were 2 or 3 other lads at the workshop who were, real electric geeks, great electric players, and had done a lot of electric guitar building in their time. And so we thought, well, and the other thing that happened was I was looking at a custom shop Strat, I think, and I it's like, what, $5,000? I can't drop $5,000 on one of those. So I thought, well, the first thing we'll do, let's try and make a good replica of a 63, I'll say S. And so we started, and the whole thing was really, we were going to make this for me, just because I wanted one. And as we went, as always happens, everyone gets geekier and geekier and geekier, and it's like, oh, we could do this. Oh, look at this. We borrowed some from friends and took the whole thing apart and saw all these kind of small things. And I'd owned a 63 Strat years and years ago, and then you thought, oh, we're going to do it then, are we? And by the time we'd got to the point where we're wondering about the headstock, I'd already thought, well, we've just got to put our own headstock on this because this is actually quite cool. And so the next thing is designing a headstock for an electric guitar, especially those guitars, is damn hard, and it's always going to be Marmite for people. Everyone's so used to the originals, and as I am, I'm always going to love those headstocks. But we started playing around with it and eventually came up with a headstock that we liked, and then just started making a few for fun. But what happened first was before we got to that point, we ended up making 2 sort of Charvel style guitars. Did you see those?
Yeah, talking of iconic headstocks.
Exactly, yeah. And so for April Fool's Day, we made 2 of these guitars and released them online with videos and pictures because it's a nice juxtaposition. Couldn't be further away from what we actually do. And we got loads of traction with it, and people were really interested in it. And so we started developing the electrics, and then once we'd made some S's and some T's, which I think we do really well, and I know obviously there's loads of that stuff out on the market, and there's so much to choose from, but we've got our niche, and we wind the pickups ourselves, and every part of that guitar, apart from the hardware, is made in our workshop. So it's kind of, we can choose great woods. We know how to finish guitars as well as anybody else in the world for that style. And so it was, fun project to get involved with. But then we started designing our own guitars. And so we've got that one called the Mindhorn, which is like an offset. And I guess if you were going to say it was inspired by something, it would be sort of potentially a Jag. And then, but the offset thing's become very popular now. And if you watched, I mean, I didn't watch Glastonbury this year, but I watched it last year, and most of the guitars on there were offsets, So you can have a lot of fun with an offset, and you can also make it look like something that was actually made in the 50s and has been forgotten about. And I love that sort of thing. And we've gotten that to some really good players now, and it's got some traction. And then we designed one called the Boosh, which is a smaller, sort of started as a 2-horn telly, and then we shifted it to give it an offset as well, and that's worked out really well. So while it is definitely more Fendery what we're doing, I think because it's only been 3 or 4 years since we started the electrics, and I think it will gradually take shape into other areas of that world. I mean, the other thing we've got is a mandolin that I play myself, which we made one prototype of this mandolin, and I love it, and I gig it regularly, and we just haven't had time to make any more. And but I firmly believe that's if for the sort of Steve Earle type players, it's a great instrument. And it's got it's got a classic sound, and it's a really warm mandolin. So it's a flat top with an oval hole, and the next one we're going to do is going to have a bit more of an arch on it. So it's kind of an English, kind of American mandolin. And again, a lot of those mandolins, if you're going F style or A style, they're damn expensive. So we're trying to find a mandolin that fits in to a better price bracket for. There's lots of guitarists out there who will never buy a mandolin because they're so expensive.
Yeah.
But if they get the right thing, they'll be able to use it, I think.
It's funny, isn't it? Because there's so much work goes into making even a decent A style mandolin, let alone an F. You know, there's just so much more you need to do, even though it's a small instrument.
The F style is the daddy of all arch tops in some respects. You know, it's mental. So, but we just haven't got the time to get involved. Yeah. We haven't got the manpower. One day we might have, but also I quite like doing our own stuff with this style of instrument. There's some room to have a bit of fun.
I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier on about to really get anywhere, you've got to sort of pick some stuff and stick with it rather than hopping all over the place. Yeah. And the stuff that is your stuff reveals itself to you, and you kind of, you know, and you can do different things, but you have to sort of commit to something a bit.
Yeah, definitely. And also now the size we're getting, we end up having to buy machinery to do a lot of these jobs. So invariably you decide you're going to do something, and then you go, oh, well, we could do it better if we got one of these. So you get one of those, and they go, oh, well, if you got one of those, you get one of those. And before you know it, you've put a lot of investment into a project. And I mean, winding your own pickups, there's an investment with that, and there's a time investment. So, you know, if you're going to go down that route, you've got to get it right. And so you can't sort of half bake that. It's like, right, okay, are we doing this? We're doing it. Go under the bonnet and sort it out. And that's kind of how you have to go about doing all of these jobs when you're serious about guitar making. And all those great guitar makers do that. And
that's the route you go down. You end up making your own cases, and then she make her own straps, and then you spend a year trying to make the perfect strap, and then all of a sudden,
yeah. I mean, I again going back to Collings and that. Did you see one of those Collings cases?
Well, I never saw one, but I heard about them. They look astonishing.
God. I mean, it's just, we've looked at making guitar cases, and you'll be mad to. And I've spoken to Nully and Steve at Collings about this, and they were just saying. They were tearing their hair out when they decided to do that. They built a whole new facility to do it, you know. That's what he was like. And he was right to do it, because when you look at those old Gibson cases that come with those 30s guitars, no one makes anything like that anymore. They're beautiful. But there's no money in it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, but talking of all these sort of innovations and like going off down different paths, the thing I've seen you do most recently on social media is you've been playing around with 3D printing to make moulds for your acoustics.
Yeah, and that's really exciting, I think. A lot of people look at that sort of thing and think, why would you do that? You can make it out of wood. But what they don't realise is what that brings to the table when you start making something on a 3D printer. It's sort of... In a way, it's like aerospace engineering, because you can work on every axis. And now most 3D printers, most CNCing is 3-axis. But so there's no limitations with 3D printing once you get involved with it. So you can put location points all over this mold, and if you can draw it, you can make it. And so again, there's quite a big investment buying a massive 3D printer, but there were no guarantees it was going to work. You know, it was a bit of hedging your bets, really. But I know that with our team, when we put our heads together, we make most things work. And now we've done that, it will transform the way we make our acoustic guitars in so many ways. And the end user might not even realise that. You know, it might be something they have no idea about. But I know inside the workshop, it will enable us to do certain jobs, and it will make a better acoustic guitar. Just the way it all marries up, and all the little foibles that every guitar maker goes through this that you work with suddenly can get sorted out, and you can iron out a load of these niggles that you constantly get. And so that's really exciting. And I think in a year's time, we'll be in a pretty because we just also bought a new CNC machine with multi-head changing, tool changing capabilities, which will mean that our necks will get better as well. And always new innovations going on, but it's usually behind the scenes. I do like to get on Instagram and show people that stuff, because I also like to. But if you think you might be the first person to do it, you can keep quiet or you can shout about it. And I think if people see you shouting about it, I'm pretty sure there's probably already other guitar makers out there thinking, oh, we'll give that a go, and it helps build our reputation in a positive way, because we're giving away information about what we're doing. But I think I've always found that interesting.
Well, it's really cool what you said about that being essentially all behind the scenes, and it's not because you're showing the world you're doing it, but it's not the point of it. The point is to create a better instrument. And so like that's whether a bit of wood is baked or frozen, or whether something is 3D printed, or like whatever you've done, the end result is in exactly what you said about that Collings earlier on. It's about walking into a shop and picking up a guitar like I did with one of your D37s and just sitting there with it, knowing the shop was closing in 20 minutes, thinking that's not long enough for me to play this thing. Like, and they're not going to stay open.
Yeah.
And so, like, I would urge people listening to this, I'll put a link in the show notes to go and look at the Atkin website and see the stuff that's going on there. But if you can find one and go and play it, and that's relatively straightforward in the UK. There's Max in London, there's Full Sights in Manchester. There's lots of great places that have these guitars. Where are these things out there in the wild in the States for the American listeners?
So the Chicago Music Exchange, they stock a good amount. There's the Music Emporium in Boston. There's the Acoustic Shop in Missouri. Do you follow those guys?
Yeah.
They do a really good YouTube channel, don't they? They're
really cool
really
stuff.
Good great players as well. There's Eddie's in Missouri, and we've got Folkways in Ontario, Canada. I'm probably forgetting. Who am I forgetting? So the US wise, that's some of them, but they're all on our website. We also do a lot in Korea, which is bizarre. Yeah. We've got like several dealers in Korea, and there's stuff. I mean, do you know the Fellowship of Acoustics in the Netherlands? Yeah, brilliant dealer. We've been dealing with them for 15 years. They've actually really inspired us, and Rudy, who was the guy who started it, me and him used to sit up at night on Facebook just messaging, go, what about one of these? What about one of these? And we'd design guitars at night, and so that they've really pushed us along. And there's some good shops in Germany. So most of Europe's got something. And it's sort of rolling out there. The US market, I think it's growing all the time. We get interest from all over, but we have to be very careful about committing to too much. We make about 500 acoustics and 200 electrics, and we're sort of reaching capacity, but at the same time, it's nice if you can find the right dealers so more people can. America's such a massive place, isn't it? And trying to get into as many states or areas as possible. We're still working on that, and it will come in the right sort of speed. And I think in the next year or so, our production will go up a little bit, so there'll be a little bit more out there. But it's amazing to me that American people are buying English-made acoustic guitars inspired by the classic American guitars, and we're really getting a lot of positive. I mean, I get emails every day from people who found them in the shops and have been blown away and are letting us know how much they like them. And what a beautiful place to be when you're some ne'er-do-well from Herne Bay.
Well, do you know what I mean? I'm some ne'er-do-well from like just outside Preston in Lancashire, and here I am, having a chat about American music every week with some of the biggest names in American acoustic music, and you just you follow the thing you love, as has been the thread of this conversation, really. and the thing you love, if you follow it, will take you somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're committed to it and you keep at it, it does work out. But it's been quite a ride.
Well, it's been really cool to get to talk to you about it. I've really enjoyed this. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome. And thanks to anyone who listens to it. And check out the guitars and keep up the good work, Matt. This is it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bluegrass Jam-Along is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins, making some of the finest guitars and mandolins in the world since the 1970s. Visit collingsguitars.com and find out why.